All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for the CoRsafe webinar. It's great to have you all. I can see attendees starting to flood in, which is brilliant. We're all being very prompt this morning, which is great to see. I'll give an early welcome to our guest speakers today, Brenton from Radaro and Ray from the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator. It's great to have you on today, gents.
Thanks for having us, Dave.
Not a problem at all. So we're just going to give a couple of minutes for our attendees to log in today and get comfortable. We're only taking an hour and a half of your time. That might seem like a lifetime for people in transport and logistics, but I hope that's okay. We will stick to our time and let you get back to your busy days or a Friday lunch if you should be so lucky. So we'll just we might give it till about 3 or 4 minutes past. For everyone to get online and get comfy. Nice to see some familiar names. I'm seeing a few of the CoRsafe team members on the call, a few of our customers, a few carriers on the call as well. That's awesome. Always nice to see in these webinars the diversity of links in the chain getting on board and having a listen in. So thanks everyone for making the time. Seeing a few service providers, seeing some load restraint wizards out there. So a bit of housekeeping just while everyone is jumping on board, and I will repeat this, so forgive me. But this session will be recorded. So if anything sort of comes up or if there's any issues, don't feel too stressed if you need to duck out. We know that the majority of you are in sort of client-facing, logistics, safety-related roles, so we do know things happen. You will all receive a copy of the recording and a copy of the slide decks after the webinar. They'll all be emailed to whichever email address you registered for the webinar on. So don't stress too much there. We will have plenty of time for question and answer throughout the session as well. So please, if you hear something interesting, you can throw it into the Q&A panel, which you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I will see those questions coming through and decide if and when I'm going to fire them to our guest speakers. So we'll have a question and answer session at the end of every presentation, and then one at the end of the webinar as well. So this is what we're here for. Lots of curly questions. Keep us on our toes. We're here to answer them and here to hopefully share some good insights with you all. And again, thank you all so much for making the time to dial in. Might just give it a minute more and then we can jump in. Thanks to those who are sending me text messages with photos of myself on the screen. You are killing me right now. Making me very self-conscious.
You're doing a great job, Dave, without any kind of background filler music. You're doing a really good job of keeping the dialogue flowing.
I need the elevator music. Look, I'm told regularly. Exactly right. I'm told very regularly that I talk too much. So this is just me flexing that muscle. All right. I reckon it's time that we crack on and we reward those who are on time. So thank you all again so much for taking the time to join us for this next in our series of CoRsafe webinars. We've been running these for the past year or so now. As a team, we try and flick between face-to-face sessions in our major capital cities and virtual webinars to allow for your busy schedule. So again, I'd like to pass on my thanks for making the time and being willing to jump on board. The team have decided to call this session Beyond Compliance, Excelling in Safety and Customer Expectations. So really, we hope to challenge your thinking today. I would argue that many, if not all of you, are aware of COR, chain of responsibility and what it is. What I'd love to get out of today for us all is for us to think a little bit more about what it means to us in our roles, within our businesses as a link in the supply chain, and also what it means for our customers and our partners across the network. So that's my goal today. As I've mentioned to those who joined earlier, this session will be recorded. You will receive a link from us after the session, which will include the recording and the slides. So please feel free to have a look through that. And if you have any questions or further commentary that you might have, please feel free to pass that through to me, and I'll get it to the guys to respond as we can. What I'm going to do now is share screen. So you'll see that coming up very, very shortly. And I might ask for a thumbs up from Ray and Brenton to confirm you can see what you need to be seeing there. So you can see the title, you can see a beautiful A&L ship there. It's a stunning photo. As I mentioned, beyond compliance, excelling in safety and customer expectations. I'm your host today. My name is Dave Jackson. I'm the National Development Manager Supply Chain for CoRsafe. I'm fortunate to have been with the business since NTI acquired CoRsafe back in 2021, and responsible for business development and product development within our broader team. So without further ado, if these transitions are going to work, just some introductions and a little bit of housekeeping. I don't need to tell you where the bathrooms are because you're in your own office or home, so that's a freebie. I'd like to just briefly introduce our speakers today. I'll give them a little bit more airtime as we get to their presentation. So we've got Ray Hassall, who is the Executive Director of Statutory Compliance for the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator. Ray has been a great resource for us and our team, and in fact, many of our carriers and consignor customers over the years. And I'll give you a little bit more about his role as he commences his presentation shortly. But we're very thankful to have Ray giving us his time today. And we also have Brenton. Brenton Gill is the CEO of Radaro. They're a tech platform that work with many of our customers and many other large businesses across Australia and in fact the globe in optimizing last mile delivery and bring great technology to businesses like yourselves. So we're going to hear from him a little bit later on some of the insights and experiences from him and his own business as well. As I mentioned really briefly, what are our objectives for today? I would love if you can all walk away with a practical understanding of COR and what it means for your business. I want you to be able to take knowledge back for yourself in your own roles, but also for your teams and the people you report to. I think we could probably all agree in this virtual room that you're safety people. You're passionate about whether you own a vehicle or you consign heavy vehicles. You're passionate about those vehicles getting from A to B, B to C, so on and so forth, safely and efficiently. And we want to make sure that you and your businesses and all the people within your teams are well engaged in that task. We hope to give you a way forward beyond compliance. So in our team at CoRsafe, we'd argue that compliance really today is a ticket to the game. What the theme that we take forward ever since this acquisition is really about good to great. How do we lead the way as major brands across the network? How do we lead? How do we be best practice? And I guess the final key point is how are we ready? So you'll hopefully all know that there is a review of the Master Code of Practice that's underway. That was first registered in November 2018, and that was a significant change in the way things worked from a regulatory and compliance perspective for a lot of our customers. We've been told by the Heavy Vehicle Regulator that there is a review underway right now, and we know or expect that review to be finalised and in fact the code to be registered somewhere in Q1 or Q2 in the new year. So we want to be well equipped and well prepared from a safety management system perspective for those changes, whatever they may be. A little bit about us. We work across Australia and New Zealand supply chains in helping our customers manage their COR obligations and duties. I'm really excited to share some of these screens. For our customers that are on the call today, that will look completely unfamiliar, which I'm really happy with. Our product team has been working tirelessly to redevelop, particularly the look and feel of our platform over recent months. And in fact, since the acquisition of CoRsafe by NTI. And we're able to bring more data, more insights to you to make on-the-job decisions in how you engage your partners, your people, and your supply chain, whether that be training, whether that be your audit program, whether that be inspections of your carrier partners. We're really excited to be bringing a new look and feel to you all who do work with us, and that is being launched on the 13th of November. So thank you to all those clients out there who have partnered with us, who have given us feedback over recent years. I did just want to, I guess, flag a thanks for your time and effort and investment there. But let's get into it. That's enough from me for the time being. My job here is to host and facilitate two great experts in the space. So first and foremost, I wanted to introduce everyone to Ray. As I mentioned, he's the Executive Director of Statutory Compliance. He's got more than 20 years experience in public administration and has led the design and implementation of regulatory reform at state and national levels for all land transport modes. This experience includes legal and regulatory policy design, administrative review, strategic analysis, high-level stakeholder liaison, parliamentary committee appearances, and managing parliamentary cabinet processes. Ray has an extensive background in regulatory compliance, and his experience includes acting as compliance expert for a legal publisher, as well as a peer reviewer for national and international transport publications, and the design and execution of strategic enforcement functions for the NHVR. I wish I had that bio. We are really, really fortunate to have him here today. I think we can all agree. Now, Ray has asked me firstly to share a video with you all, and I've been fortunate enough to have a look at this video. So I'm going to pop that up on the screen, and then we'll hand over to Ray to share some thoughts. Bear with me while I get this video up. Can we see that? Brenton, I can see you. Thumbs up. Yep. Awesome. All right, I'm going to play that, and then we're going to hear from Ray.
I thought the company I led was pretty good at safety. In 7 years of operations, we had 0 on-site fatalities or serious injuries. We put a lot of effort on the safety environment in our core business, which was mining. Unfortunately, the fatality that we experienced involved a driver of our primary transport contractor and occurred off the mine site. As you've just heard, my company had a clear and unequivocal responsibility as part of the chain of responsibility to undertake due diligence on the transport contractor and ensure it had all the stipulated safety systems in place, including fatigue management of its drivers and mechanical safety of its heavy vehicles. The fact that we had a strong safety culture and that we had outsourced our haulage activity to an experienced heavy vehicle operator in no way alters or diminishes these responsibilities. It is important for organisations and executives to understand the breadth of these responsibilities and the need for demonstrable systems to manage the risk of all associated activities. If you're an organisation that does not genuinely value safety, then good luck to you. You can take your chances. This video is aimed at those firms who genuinely value safety. These are the corporations, particularly those involved in heavy vehicle transport activities for the first time, that need to be aware of their obligations and responsibilities under the National Heavy Vehicle legislation. With respect to heavy vehicle haulage, I would urge small businesses to utilise the NHVR resources, as this body provides a lot of the required documentation detailing what your responsibilities are under the HVNL. These resources are practical and have been scientifically developed from long experience and rigorous research within the trucking industry, and may just save you, your employees and your organisation from the tragic and expensive process that comes with serious accidents and fatalities.
Anyone who's been involved in a serious accident or fatality in the workplace understands the sickening feeling that comes with that initial phone call. I received that call. I had personal obligations as a director of a company with safety duties under the Heavy Vehicle National Law. Those obligations included understanding the hazards, risks created by our own transport activities and ensuring we did everything reasonably practicable to eliminate or minimise them. As you've heard, we thought we had developed a strong safety culture within our business that was underpinned by a comprehensive safety management system, and I still got that call. Don't wait for a fatality to review your obligations and organisational performance. I hope this video and the accompanying HVNL due diligence manual assist other directors and businesses to not only review their obligations under the Heavy Vehicle National Law, but to drive best practice and ensure that everyone gets home safely.
Great, thanks very much for that, Dave. As mentioned, my name's Ray Hassall. I'm an Executive Director with the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator. I'm responsible for the major investigations and prosecution services within the NHVR. There's about 800 of us now. I have been involved with the regulator since about 2013, the project office that set it up, the NTC that set up both this and the Rail Safety Regulator. My passion is for the effective administration and enforcement of the national law, which probably sounds a bit technocratic, but ultimately it's about ensuring drivers and other road users get home. That video you saw was produced as a result of legal action by the regulator. A driver was killed as a result through their engagement with Gundekin Resources in Queensland. It was investigated by our South Australian team. The more attentive of you may have noticed the roles that Mark and Jonathan occupy. They're not drivers. They don't own a transport company. They've never registered a truck to my knowledge. But as they recognised in the video, they were duty holders, and their conduct did fall short of that required by the national law, and there were consequences. So we're very much at the not kidding around part of the enforcement of the national law in relation to parties whose conduct does adverse impact safely. And that's not an advertisement for our team. All of you who are participating today are the prime movers in acquiring those outcomes. The regulator can do what it does, and we'll try and do it as effectively, efficiently, and impactfully as we can. But at a day-to-day decision-making basis, those safety decisions are going to be made by you. So hopefully I can give you a bit of assistance to make them as well as you possibly can. All righty. Okay, Dave, so I've got control of the PowerPoint, I hope. You trust. Good stuff. Okay. First of all, I'd like to just issue a quick acknowledgement of country. The National Heavy Vehicle Regulator acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands across the nation. We recognise the deep and lasting connection that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have to lands and waters across the country, and thank Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people for caring for the lands for over 60,000 years. We also pay our respects to elders past and present, and to emerging community leaders. We acknowledge that many of Australia's major road networks are attributed to First Nations peoples having used star maps as waypoints on their journeys through Australia's harsh terrain to reach landmarks such as watering holes. This, as I say, National Heavy Regulator, you should be familiar with who we are by now. If not, go to the website. It will describe exactly who we are, what we're trying to do, and the people you need to talk to. In the event you found this interaction useful, my details will be there. And if I'm not available, my colleagues Belinda Hughes and Emma Watson, who you may or may not have met before, are always available to speak about these matters. This was a really challenging presentation title for me as a regulator to think about going beyond compliance. It's inherently good and inherently desirable. As a road user, I want people to go beyond compliance as far as humanly possible, but within the actual regulatory framework, what does it mean? Now, I'll walk you through some of the adverse consequences, as I'm obliged to, for when the conduct of a duty holder goes beyond compliance. The benefits of going above compliance are manifold. Hopefully they impact your commercial reputation, your livelihood, your own internal sense of moral well-being, and your insurance premiums. Is that right, David? So there are any number of sort of social benefits that are attributable to going beyond compliance. But to try and put it in a reg framework, I've tried to explain the two aspects of the law where the decision-making is perhaps less complicated and you can't really go beyond compliance meaningfully at all, and an example of where you really do need to be making the sorts of value judgments that we're going to be talking about today. So for anyone who's been dealing with oversized goods or, oversized vehicles or those bigger loads, you've got to tie a flag on the end. That's it. If you want to make it 400 by 400, good on you. That there's no particular benefit that's associated with doing that, but it's allowable. It's a much harder decision-making process in relation to example 2. Now, if you are unable to meet your obligation in the first example I provided, it's probably an infringement notice or a relatively modest court attendance notice penalty. If you're unable to meet your obligations in relation to the reasonable practicability requirement under the national law, it's up to 5 years imprisonment. So if it were me, I know where I would be spending the majority of my time and where I would be erring on the side of going beyond compliance. In reality, the national law is pretty simple. It goes for any number of pages, I think 757 or something the last time I looked, and associated regulation standards, guidelines, procedures, and other material. But there's really only 3 important questions. And I hope to help you answer them today. So do I have a duty or duties under the national law? What conduct or activity does it attach to? And of course, what do I need to satisfy it? It's no point being able to answer the first two without the third. Why does it matter? Okay, as I said, I will walk you through some of the adverse consequences of not making that decision process effectively. So if we do take you to court, the court can impose any combination of the following: registration, cancellation, or suspension. It's not just for one vehicle, it could be for a number of vehicles. A supervisory intervention order. That's in effect an ongoing obligation to do certain things once you're convicted, and it could be to install onboard mass, some form of onboard telematics, electronic work diaries, training, and so forth. A commercial benefits penalty order, which allows us to request the court to impose a penalty up to 3 times the commercial benefit obtained from non-compliance. It's probably a little bit underused, but you should know it exists. Prohibition orders, which allow us to request a court to prevent a systematic offender from participating in the transport industry for up to a 12-month period. Financial penalties of up to $3 million and change for a corporation, or $300,000 and change for an individual. Whether we ask a court to record or not record a conviction. I'm sorry, my dog's here. I might just have to let him out, excuse me. He's a good boy, but he's a terrible presenter. And a period of imprisonment for up to a period of 5 years for one specific penalty. So if you are unable to perform the decision-making process effectively in your duty holder, and we think it's in the public interest to take a matter to court, then those are the things that we can ask a court to consider in resolving these matters. Alrighty. We do take people to court. We're in court about 4,500 times a year. When I said we're at the no kidding part of the spectrum, it is not kidding. A lot of those fines are for breaches of prescriptive obligations, work rest, mass. He's such a good boy, but come in, Monty. Never get a staff either. Okay, so
who knew we'd get a guest presentation from Ray's dog?
That's right. So we've got what I've tried to do is just isolate a couple of recent court penalties. I think I've jumped slides inadvertently. Sorry, beg your pardon. And what it shows you is we're really getting sort of in the vicinity of Dave, do you know how to take this back? I think I've moved too far along in my presentation while I was distracted. So there's a table of penalties, which will just show you that really for significant offending, if we identify dozens or scores of major work rest breaches, it's tens of thousands of dollars. I think there's a recent decision in Queensland called NM Foley, which is under appeal, I should stress, which was $1.2 million. We can talk about the basis for that decision, hopefully before the end of this. And also, we have requested and obtained a sentence of imprisonment for an individual in South Australia whose conduct was both reckless, exposed an individual to risk, and resulted in the death of an individual in front of his family. In that case, the period of imprisonment was wholly suspended for a period of 2 years on good behaviour. But what it tells you is if the conduct is serious enough and the evidence will support it, then courts are prepared to go the full whack on sentences of imprisonment where you expose someone to a risk of death or serious injury. So it's a proper law. Just moving forward. There we go. So how do we answer those really important questions and avoid those unpleasant sanctions that I've just discussed? First question, do I have a duty? If you're not a duty holder under the national law, this will be of interest to you, but probably not critical from the perspective of your day-to-day role. This should be really well known to you. They should be pretty clear. Employer, operator, scheduler, consigner, consignee. These are pretty common concepts within the industry. I do try and talk about off-road duty holders wherever possible, because I think that's the area where the national law still has to get greatest penetration in terms of the understanding of compliance obligations, our ability to monitor it, and objective evidence of enforcement. So if you're a loading manager, for example, there's a definition of the premises that basically requires you to have 5 or more vehicles a day coming in and out. But if you're a loading manager, you should be very, very familiar with the contents of the national law and the master code. If you consign goods, if you're the consignee of goods, if you engage someone as a prime contractor, and potentially as a scheduler as well, that it's a little bit untested, and hopefully we'll get a chance to explore that. But it's a personal view of mine that I think people schedule goods without realising that it triggers obligations under the national law. So they're pretty basic concepts. They mean what they say. But if you're particularly an off-road duty holder and you've never really given any thought to this because you think it's only for operators, I would really counsel you to look at it quite carefully. So what conduct does it attach to? A lot of people make a mistake and they go to the examples in the Act as to what transport activities include, and they think, oh, I don't schedule, don't contract, it's all fine. Or even if I'm a duty holder, I don't do any of those things. But you really have to look at the definition from the very first words, because it's an inclusive definition. I'll read it out. Transport activities are everything you do or your business does that's related to the use of a heavy vehicle on the road, including these matters. Okay, so it's already started off with everything. I'm not probably the statutory terms around contracting and scheduling, so forth, don't do a lot of work because you're already a duty holder who performs one of those roles, and it's already everything you do that impacts a vehicle. That informs the content of your duty. But it is probably worth looking at the business practices component because it does help people. It gives them an entry point into the Act. Okay, you're purchasing vehicles or equipment, getting the right gear, paying attention to your contracts, writing the contracts down. I'm still surprised, I suppose, the extent to which the industry runs on handshakes, verbal agreements, good faith. I would really, really counsel people to think about writing material down, and at the contract formation stage, think about how this is going to be done safely. Running a depot, hiring and training, developing and implementing policies and procedures. At that point, the definition's probably stopped doing any work because it's just restating other parts of the Act in the context of what a transport activity is. But if you remember it's everything, that's a good start. Okay, well, what do I have to do? Okay, so you've got to ensure the safety of your transport activities so far as is reasonably practicable. Okay. Now that duty includes your obligation to eliminate risks, and that is the first duty. I think sometimes people think, well, this is really about risk minimization. It's not necessarily. If you can't perform a function without exposing people to the risk of death or serious injury after a meaningful assessment, I'm not sure that minimization is going to work. Now, there is inherent risk in transport. I think this whole discussion has to take place in the context of the fact that, yes, the Act contemplates goods going from A to B. Okay, so that is a given, and that there are inherent risks. But if in the way that you perform that activity, a transport activity, there is a risk that is going to expose someone to a serious risk of death or serious injury, then you have to go through the decision-making process and actively consider whether you can eliminate it, and if you can't eliminate it, whether you can minimize it so far as is reasonably practical. There are some other bits of the Act, there are some other bits of the obligation that I think people probably don't pay enough attention to, and really it's about the encouragement, indirect or direct, for another party to breach their obligations. And again, if you think really carefully about what the impact is of what you do. And I'll give you the classical example that's given to us. You've got a driver whose hours are good, vehicle's good, pre-trip's done, haven't been doing a second job, everything's ready to go. They've got the call to go and pick up the goods. They go to the yard, it's locked. Okay, that driver's work rest is now completely shattered. In the example that I'm using, maybe there's contingency otherwise, but you have to look at the impact of the inability to manage the availability of the goods that were consigned on that driver and their own ability to then manage their work rest under the Act. I mean, it's only an example, but it's a good template for thinking, how does what I do impact that driver? Because that's really what this discussion is all about. It's why the Act exists. It's why our organisation is tasked with doing this. So that's really the central point for considering what your obligation is.
Ray, if I might jump in there briefly, I think it's a good point you raise, and I would say I hear it more often than not these days when talking with some of our partners, is that old adage of, I work with someone that's been in transport for years, for years and years and years. They've got lots of trucks. So I think often consigners can get into the headspace of, I should only be worried about the duties of my carriers. And I'm feeling pretty confident that they've got their duties all squared away, and maybe miss thinking about their own duties and obligations under the law. So I think it's just an important point that's worth restating or highlighting, that they do in fact have their own duties, and it might seem obvious, but I think to many there still is that misconception that it's on the carrier, when in fact it's not. It's a shared duty. And I, from looking at even the video you shared at the start, that seemed to be a bit of a contributing factor, that assumption that the carrier had it all under control.
Yeah, and there are any number of excellent carriers, but how do you assure yourself of that? It's not on the basis of a phone call or one-off discussion. It's an ongoing positive obligation to ensure that this job is being done safely. And if you're putting your goods on that truck, you're a duty holder, and to the extent you can influence or control it, the responsibility attaches it to you, which is why there's any number of points of guidance in the master code and the regulatory advice to say at contract formation and afterwards, this is what industry considers to be best practice, and this is what the regulator will be putting in front of a defendant or the court in the unfortunate event that the matter does go that far. We talked about reasonable practicability. That's a really standard test. Everyone here, I suspect, will have an overlapping obligation to manage the safety of their own activities as a PCBU. Reasonable practicability is the same test. There's what looks like a get-out clause for gross disproportion. So if the cost of implementing control would be grossly disproportionate to the risk, it won't be taken to be reasonably practicable. I've never, ever seen that argued. I've talked to counsel and other regulators who've been in the gig for longer than I have. They've never seen it successfully argued. Maybe there's a case somewhere that will be the exception that proves a rule. But if I was trying to argue gross disproportion, I'd be incredibly careful that no one else was able to successfully run it. And I would also look at what other things that I have or that my business has spent money on. And it's the old argument, safety is our number one priority. What does the investment in safety look like compared to other cost centers? And what does it look like to the income and profit that we're booking? So yeah, you could argue gross disproportion, but I would counsel against it. If you think it's a serious risk, then the control has to be of commensurate seriousness to control it. Our policy at the National Regulator requires us to consider the conduct of corporations and their executives in the formation of any charges. We do that for any matter. We did it for the Gundicum directors, and if I had the stats to hand, I would show how many matters we have on foot at the moment where we're going to allege a failure on the part of similar office holders. But it's a separate, distinct duty, okay? It requires you as an office holder, and it's an onerous duty, much like any corporate obligation is. It requires you to acquire knowledge about your operations, the risks, and how those risks can be managed, that you get the resources, that you use them, and that you have an ongoing basis for obtaining information about how well those resources are actually being effectively used to control the risk. So you really need to verify. It's probably 3 steps. Make sure you understand your business. Well, I think that goes without saying, but especially in relation to the safety risks that are associated with it, and your contracting parties. Get the resources and use them. Make sure they work, and if they're not working, change them. Okay. So as I said, the principles of the law are actually really at one level straightforward, in that they're plain English. They use the words like reasonably quite a lot to try and get people to understand that what's being expected of them isn't the superhuman or the absurd, but it's what a reasonable person who stood outside the transaction would expect in that case. As I say, we do go to court pretty regularly. I think we've got 22 primary duty matters in court at the moment. We've resolved about 20 in the last year. Things did slow down because of COVID. So I would again caution people to consider whether that's actually representative of what a normal enforcement profile would look like for the organisation. I suspect it'll speed up. So I'll give you the summary. You can take this away if you're not particularly interested in reading the detail of the court matters. Then this is really just a sort of a crib sheet for what the courts have told us. Don't try and contract out. There's a specific clause in the Act that voids any attempt to do so. I think it's 748 from memory. But if it's in there, I'm happy to share that information if it's of interest. If you're aware of something and you do nothing, the court's attention will be drawn immediately to that, and particularly the frequency and seriousness of the emissions relative to the inaction by the duty holder. Following on from that, if you don't have any systems in place or processes in place to monitor compliance, they will look to that. Occasionally I sort of hear an argument to say, well, if I don't know it, I can't be made accountable for it. No, that loophole was argued probably sometime in the 90s. It's been dealt with legislatively. So it requires you to have and include those systems as a director, and it will form part of your obligations as a duty holder as well. If you have the systems but don't use them, I think the hot point at the moment is probably for the fatigue and driver detection devices. Sorry, Dave, I have no idea how I'm going on time. So if you want me to wind up, just do that.
You're all good.
Okay, so fatigue and driver detection devices, I've heard the argument used that they are a driver amenity or a driver resource. I think that's a very dangerous position to adopt, because the courts know that there are businesses out there that require them, that monitor them, and that take action, not necessarily disciplinary action, but they do have a response where the alerts are detected, rather than just simply saying, well, now the driver knows, it's up to them. So I think it's an incredibly dangerous argument to run, and I wouldn't run it. Having written policies that no one's disseminated within the company and that staff are unaware of. So we do see occasionally, documents that are barely worth the paper they're printed on, and you can see that it's material that has simply had one logo replaced with another. It's been put into a nice white two-ring binder. It's been put on the shelf, and there it sits. So policies are in the hierarchy of controls the least effective in some cases, but they are still necessary. It's very difficult to argue that for a complex or high-risk task performed by multiple people, that it doesn't need to have a policy or system of work documented somewhere. I think we're really converging with where work health and safety law has been for a long time. Now, counterintuitively, it's not a ticker box system. Okay, no sensible, sane person wants a ticker box system or a piece of paper that exists only there. It's got to be meaningful. It's got to be used. Far better, it has coffee stains on it and grubby fingerprints, because people are regularly looking at it and saying, okay, I understand this, or I don't understand this, or this is wrong, or this has changed. Have a document that's used. Don't have a document that looks fantastic that you think you can put in front of a regulator and they'll say, oh, what a lovely, neat, clean document. That doesn't seem to be used a lot. And facilitating a culture and expectation of performance at any cost. It happens. I suspect it happens incrementally and unconsciously, possibly in times of adversity, but I've been exposed to enough of these incidents to know that it does happen. And culture, I think, as all of us have been taught, culture trumps strategy most of the time. So if you have a culture that recognises, embraces and values safety, you're in a pretty good place. E. Pioli is probably, it's a really important case for lawyers. Some of the factual aspects of it are really useful from the court, looking at what you can do or what its expectations are in terms of your management, the management of your obligations in relation to licensing, speeding, fatigue and training. Most importantly, it emphasises that the Act is concerned with risk. Nobody has to be killed. Okay. Probably two things that are real red flags for me when someone starts talking about the national law and how it works. One, they say the words reasonable steps. I then conclude that they haven't read the Act since 2018, 16 even, or that they say, no, an adverse event's required before a court will take this seriously. It's just not true. It's not true at all. And E. Pioli, which was on appeal, so it's a court of record. It's told us that it is a risk-based legislative system. And just by virtue of the amount of freight that goes through New South Wales, it will be the decision that's applied in each of those matters in courts in New South Wales.
Ray, can I hit pause on you there for a moment? We have a lot of questions coming in and comments and things like that. So would you mind jumping to as a flip side to that one, to the consignor prosecution as maybe a sort of a good wrapping point, and then we can just give a little bit more time for the questions that seem to be flooding in. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
And we can send these back out, the slides out.
Yeah, that's fine. This was, I haven't said the name simply because it was an unreported case, and we don't shame companies. This is a prosecution doesn't mean you're a bad company or a bad person. It means a requirement of the Act was breached, and we think there was sufficient evidence, and it was in the public interest to prosecute it. So in this case, we were looking at the importation of material from China. It doesn't matter where it's from really, but it was the import of material from overseas, which was then consigned internally and moved between the port and whatever the endpoint for distribution or use was. And it's a really important one because as long as I've been involved in this industry, people have said to me, you can't deal with imported goods. Give up. So we were looking at freight containers here. I think there was something like 220 movements. As you can see from the photograph, the heavy vehicle turned over with the freight container on it. I'm not sure if you can see it was on a pedestrian crossing. So in that case, we didn't prosecute the operator, and we certainly didn't prosecute the driver. We only prosecuted the consignor as they moved the product forward. And they'd already had some controls. And the really, really helpful one was the photographic evidence of the interior of the freight container as it was packed before it was loaded. So they knew what they needed to do. It just wasn't done regularly, it wasn't done well, no real attention was paid to it. And of course, for this load, and I don't know how many others of that 220 movements, the material was improperly secured. It was, just rolling around everywhere. And the moment the vehicle took a pretty gentle turn, it flipped over on a pedestrian crossing. Thankfully, there was no one there at the time. So in this case, the court was satisfied the duty existed, that there were reasonably available controls, including the photographing and audit of the material before it was brought into Australia, that there were in fact international standards that governed the packing and freight container movements, very complex and specialised. Neil Chambers and his team can talk about it ad infinitum, and usefully so. So I'm really paraphrasing here, but there are definitely international standards that are available that the court had regard to consider how these goods could be packed before they were moved on in Australia. So duty was there. There were reasonably practicable controls that were implemented after the incident, and there was a breach of the duty in the failure to implement them beforehand, which we took to court. It was only something like $75,000, which I think was probably a recognition of the good corporate conduct of the defendant in this case. So a non-trivial sum, but I think they were relatively fortunate and advantaged by their genuine contrition and their cooperation and their good corporate conduct generally.
Great. Well, we might look to take some questions if that's okay, Ray. Just while we've got them coming through. So I might just stop sharing there for a moment just to get our faces back on screen. Ray, now I obviously alluded to it a little bit earlier on in the piece, and obviously you can only say as much as you can say. But one question that we got prior to the webinar today, and it's been sent through, is what's the next major change coming up for the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator, or at least what's forecasted over the next few years as a major change that our consigners and our carriers can anticipate or prepare for even?
I mean, the industry, on the industry side of the fence, you guys will know better than I do, zero emission vehicles are coming. Supposedly partially or fully autonomous vehicles are coming. They're probably in the to be considered box, frankly. You can see the level of investment in Western Sydney, Western Melbourne, Western Brisbane, all the Western areas of the very large distribution centres. There's a really fertile field of activity for those bodies to come together and agree some standards for safe operation and engagement of heavy vehicles. I think they're lucky in a lot of cases. They're greenfields or brownfields development with a lot of space for vehicles. The companies that are getting involved are pretty well resourced. They're very competent and professional as far as I can tell. And they are likely to drive out poor practice, I suspect. and we will be asking them to come together at some point and say, what do you think are the safe standards for engaging with operators if you're a DC or a consolidation centre, or however you describe yourself? That's the main one. I really do think the era in which operators are the predominant defendant under the national law has a time limit.
Yep, absolutely. Another question that's come through: how do we make sure another duty holder ensures their risk is controlled, particularly when the other duty holder is not contracted to you? Thinking about the supplier of goods using their own transport, sending products to another location that are not contained, resulting in load shift during transit.
Okay, that's a tricky one. I mean, effective communication, presumably you have some contractual relationship where you can ask them what their assurance processes are, and then depending on the level and type of risk, you can explore with them how it can be verified. So again, if they're arm's length, to what extent do they genuinely have control? And you might meet quarterly to say, well, what are your incident rates? Are they going up? Are they going down? What's your risk profile doing? Again, it's such a broad and diverse industry. I'd like to be able to sort of speak in more specific terms, but it's always around assurance, communication, and having sufficient contractual terms, at least in your bilateral relationship, to get as far as you can influence and control. There's no point getting involved in things like when I put things in Australia Post, I don't then go and demand to see the driver scheduling arrangements. It's not the point of the Act. It's meaningful risks.
I think we have a few of those Australia Post team members on the call. Yeah. So I don't know if they would like to be engaged by you to ask those questions, I'm sure they'll let us know. No, absolutely. The other one I wanted to ask that was sent through prior is, and I think we could probably all agree that on this call, there's a lot of safety people, and they're in their roles because they care about safety, as I mentioned earlier, and they, in their roles, have an obligation to manage down with and out, I guess, to their supply chain partners, to their team members that are working in warehouses or on site or whatever it may be. But they also, to an extent, need to manage and educate up to directors, as you alluded to earlier, with regards to executive duties. Have you seen any instances of what good looks like when trying to make directors aware to buy into the reality of COR and, in fact, their own duties? Or what would you recommend to make it, I guess, to engage them well?
I mean, people don't only respond to sanctions and punishment and negative messaging. I think, most people are sort of rational, sane actors who don't want to see deaths on the road. So you can appeal to people's self-interest, and also, they're better angels. In terms of practical advice, I know at least one very large transport company has I think their board meetings run for 3 days, one day of which is spent going through safety data, which would be exhausting as the safety manager or managers in that organisation, but absolutely fundamental when you consider the scale of their operations. So there's not a lot of point us telling us which KPIs do we use, how long should they last for, what's an acceptable rate of variance. It's not a really fruitful discussion for us, but that gives you a sense of a context for a multi-million-dollar national organisation, how long they spend at executive level and what their expectations of their team are.
Great. Another interesting question, something we've come across a lot recently with some clients jumping on board. What steps are being taken to manage mass compliance of primary producers shipping to customers, particularly when the goods are variable in liquid content and volume isn't a good indicator?
Well, I know of one initiative that's being undertaken to manage the transport of liquid goods, but I feel like there are other people who could speak to that more directly than I could. Grain and cattle, it is tricky. I think if we were to have a compliance issue with grain and similar primary products, we probably would be dealing with things at the improvement notice level for a fair while, because the controls are difficult. If the wheat gets wet, if the cow steps to the right, but you're still within GVM, then it's a very difficult task to persuade a court that safety risk is crystallised. So I think there's going to be a lot of negotiated compliance work at the level of primary producers, and it's just a reality of the nature of the material. If there's anyone who knows about liquids, please feel free to speak up.
And I mean, engaging, that's the key thing, right? That's what we see within our platform is, we see a lot of our customers engage their carriers, because most of our customers in CoRsafe probably don't own a single heavy vehicle or own a very small number. They're not too bad at engaging with their carriers, but engaging with suppliers, primary producers, seems to be a pretty consistent challenge within our business.
Yeah, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. The duty exists, and if someone's killed, that will be forensically investigated. Let's not muck around. But for an exceedance of a matter of percent on a barley journey, well, that's a different order of compliance issue, and you would probably have to use a different solution to deal with it. It would be disproportionate, I think, in a lot of cases. But the duty still exists, and we would work to deal with it.
Great. Final one before we continue to press on forward, and this is a pretty straightforward question. Will mass-managed vehicles eventually be mandated to install onboard scales, and if so, when?
That's a matter for ministers, David.
Good answer. There you go. If anyone has any other questions, we've got one more. I might look at this one. Whilst a way to go, do you feel we are seeing a positive response from where we were 5 to 10 years ago in respect of executive due diligence acknowledgement?
I do. And it's a mistake to do this at one level. The gross number of deaths and serious injuries is not where we want it to be, but normalized over billion ton kilometers, it's going down. I think it's going down because of ongoing investment in safety. Just speaking off the cuff for a moment, if we really need to get FDDT into vehicles, and every executive you can talk to who you can get this issue in front of and say to them, this stuff saves lives, even more than advanced electronic braking or lane departure warnings. If you can say to them, ask everyone you contract with whether they use FDDT, whether they require their subcontractors to do it, whether they do it on high risk routes, or if they know what a high risk route for driver fatigue is.
Yeah, so quick clarification there. Fatigue driver distraction technology, is that just for clarification there. And there are some great solutions out there, which for those who don't know, NTI is the largest transport and logistics insurer in Australia. We know many of the good providers out there and have seen firsthand both the bad side of it when things go wrong, and then also what technology like this can do to genuinely save lives. So we would highly recommend businesses take a look at that solution if they do own a vehicle. And I mean, for this room, as I say, a lot of these businesses have influence, or I guess not a control, but an influence over the decisions that the carriers make around safety initiatives. So how do we encourage the uptake of that technology? So it still remains a significant challenge, particularly in the distraction space. That's great. Look, I might pause it there. We have another speaker. We will have another slot of time available at the end of the session for any other questions that we haven't gotten to, if anyone thinks of anything while Brenton is presenting. But Ray, thank you so much for those insights. That was a really informative session, and as I say, some really practical takeaways. So thank you for sharing. Our second speaker today is Brenton Gill. He is the co-founder and managing director of Radaro, and has been doing that for just a little under 10 years from what I can see in LinkedIn. So I'll take that as gospel. So Radaro, for those who don't know, they're a partner of CoRsafe, and NTI is in fact a customer of theirs. So a brilliant platform, and one that we're really, really happy to be working closely with. I'll let Brenton tell you a little bit about what they do, but the reason we wanted Brenton to come along and Radaro to be involved is they play the role of a supplier to the industry and have a really great method of engaging consigners in doing a little better, in optimizing what they do today, meeting the needs and expectations of their customers, their partners, and in fact the consumer. So I thought it'd be great for Brenton to share some insights, to come along, and I've already got some questions that have come through both prior to the session and during the session today, which I'll throw to you over time, mate. So Brenton, over to you, and I'll reshare the screen.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dave. And look, really appreciate the introduction and invite into this session. We might, to some, seem a little bit left of field to heavy vehicle regulation, and to some extent we are, but there's some really core themes that I think are super relevant in context to what Ray just covered and why we exist as a platform and what we do. So I'll hopefully cover off on some of those as we work through the deck here. Just see if my screen click. Here we go. Okay, so just a little bit of background for those that don't know who we are. So as Dave alluded to, I'm a co-founder of Radaro. And in 2016, LinkedIn's a tad misleading date, but we're approaching 8 years now of being in business. And in 2016, my business partners and I, sat down in a pub and designed this platform where we wanted to give the Uber-style visibility to shippers. And it was I'll call it an uneducated kind of platform guess on what Radaro could be, but lent itself to some pretty deep discovery into the network. And what we wanted to do was basically see who wanted that type of visualization. And there was a pretty, decent amount of hands up to say, yeah, this is interesting. And it was interesting from a consumer viewpoint, right? So end consumers receiving product that people want to know what stuff is. And we kind of everyone gets that now. And if you go back 8 years ago, it was relatively revolutionary. But what we also saw at the same time was actually it was about control, and it was about workflow digitization. And to what Ray just touched on, a couple of those points are super relevant. And it was about going to different industry applications for our technology. So we do a lot in the B2C market, but what we're going to talk about today is a little bit of the emergence of B2B and how we're taking our technology and our clients are leading the product development of our tool outside of the traditional B2C kind of market, which is really key for us as a business and a growth area for our business. But the names that we work with are household names. So they're brands that I'm sure everyone on the call would know and have an affiliation to someone on that particular list there, either as a customer or aware of the supply chain and the workflow of those particular brands. And to give you context of where our tech kind of fits and how we do things. So as a technology platform, we're what they call a cloud-based SaaS. A SaaS, or a software as a service software, basically means that you can access it via the internet and leverage the tool via URLs, etc. What it means is we don't have to install things on premises. Now, that's interesting because in the supply chain, we also run out of iOS and Android devices. Now, that can be dedicated hardware that's installed into the cab of a truck. But what we have seen, and one of our hypotheses early, was that, well, not everyone owns their fleet, right? So there's a huge contractor network, subcontractor network, and, to all the questions that are coming in to Ray on his session, it's a huge area of interest, operational effort, but also of concern. And our view to that was, well, it's a control play. So if you have, for example, a group here like King Living, who's a great partner of Radaro, they have contractor networks out there. The drivers aren't necessarily owned by the brand, but they work dedicated for the brand. But they bring their own vehicle and they do their work on behalf of. The ability to get visualization control of those trucks is really, really interesting to the brand. A brand like a King Living or a Miller or an Asco or a Nick Scali, they want to have better customer experiences. So we went, okay, that's quite interesting. And then what does that mean from a real-time kind of insights across the network? So once we've got visualization of a network, then what can we actually do with the data that kind of comes from that? So early days, as I said, we were primarily a B2B tool, right? And what we focused on was CX, customer experience. Now, in a way, that was our Trojan horse into the industry. So the whole where is my staff, Uber experience, that was the reason we could open doors early and get interest and get insight from predominantly actually the marketing departments of the businesses that we were talking to, or the customer care departments of the businesses we were talking to. What then happened though is that they started to engage the operating teams, obviously, and say, well, if we want to be better on the customer front, how do we get our operations to actually help us do that? And so we structured our technology around brand loyalty and engagement. But then we looked at things behind the scenes. So how do we get call centers up to speed with what's going on within a network? Because in a consumer-facing market, that's extremely important. It's about answering questions. It's about eliminating the where is my stuff phone call. And what this does is create administrative burden on companies. Now, when you introduce contractor networks into that workflow, it makes it even more complicated, because how do you get vision over something you don't own? And so Radaro is built around providing the kind of transparency around that. And then how do we then bring that information centrally so that we can resolve things faster, right? That's a really key, core important piece to Radaro from an operating workflow. Now, of course, that has knock-on implications in relation to accountability of our network. And Ray mentioned something really interesting on his presentation. He talked about the formality of agreements and the formality of relationships and contractual obligations and actually writing things down. Radaro is built around that. It's about creating evidence of transaction through our workflow so that the consignor, or in our world, the brand that we're working with, or the DC, actually has evidence of what's being done in the field. And the interesting part to that is that's not as easily obtained as it might seem. Dave, Ray mentioned the point around having coffee stains on pieces of paper. Well, yeah, we completely understand that because it means actually the paper's actually getting used. Our world is about actually replacing that paper and creating it digitally so that you have a digital stamp of what's actually going on. And in our world, that's critical because it's an audit trail. And from the viewpoint of a consignor or someone running heavy vehicle or fleet, or even if it's not heavy vehicle, it's about being able to go back to evidence of what was done with a digital layer above a network. And that's where Radaro plays a huge part. So our platform from the B2C side started to create a transparent and accountability across the supply chain, right? So we'll have clients that have, as I've said, their own fleet that they employ and certain trucks on the road, contractors that they utilize, or either on a full truckload or part truckload viewpoint, or they have 3PLs, and those 3PLs are partners to their business. And a few of the questions came in: how do we get accountability, and how do we actually get a really strong relationship with our 3PLs? And that's complicated, right? You're asking the business that you don't necessarily own, but you utilize to conform to your standards. That's a really complicated part of both the supply chain, but also from the software side. And we understand that really well. So we do a lot of work kind of around that particular problem statement. So really what we like to talk about as a business being a software company is the benefit of digitization, right? So digitization is really creating a layer above the network that we can then go to and audit, as I just talked about. And the way that we do that is we start with CX, as I just mentioned. So how do we have a great customer experience as our, call it, reason to exist? But then we actually go into operational workflow, which is the crux of our capability. Now, operational workflow, let me make this point really clear, is different between every single business that we work with. So there's nuances to how they do things. There's complexities, there's simplicities, there's requirements for detailed documentation, or sometimes there's light touch documentation, but it varies across our entire portfolio of clients. So what we built was a modular tech stack that allowed us to think of it as adjust the requirements and configure our technology to the workflow of each client. But really, what that does is then bring operational benefits to the business. So what we're trying to do here is find excuses and reasons to create digitization of the supply chain, right? Which ties itself to how do we actually get this industry change and adoption of capabilities that can enhance accountability, compliance, regulatory safety, etc., but also operational workflow. Because in business, and myself running a private enterprise, things have to have an ROI or a cost benefit reward, and we're very aware of that. So what we do is we talk about efficiencies in our business. We talk about how we can increase delivery volume, so the number of drops that may occur. Now, within the heavy vehicle network, that may not be a relevant factor because it might be single movement. But in the world of kind of split loads, LTLs, we're talking about multiple deliveries. In the parcel world or the individual freight world, you're talking about 20, 30, 50 stops in a day and how you might be routing those. It's about the delivery routes that we optimize to, and how do we make sure that our fleet is effective on road and accountable to some of the safety constraints that may exist based on different truck profiles and road routes and restrictions. Invoice reconciliation, so that's accountability of networks. We won't touch too much on that for this particular call, but reducing paper, I guess, reliance as well as a key area for us. And a really interesting case study, and Dave, when we talked the other day, we talked a little bit about some case studies, was about 3 or 4 years ago, we met a particular client and they said, look, in our workflow, we have this issue where we have to scan back in delivery dockets and receipts into a system. So they were doing, call it 400 or 500 fulfillments a day. They would receive 300 and something back a day into the office, and they'd come back to the front desk, and it was someone's role to collate all that data and then take it to a scanner and then scan all that information into the system and then upload it into something else to try and create accountability. Now, the problem was compliance. It first of all was low, so actually getting the dockets back was difficult. The coffee stains and the rips and the tears and the things that just go on during the day was problematic as well. So what we actually built for that group was OCR technology, which means that we can actually scan that document on site at the point of delivery. And what that did would streamline that paper or reduce the paper reliance, but streamline the workflow. With a particular client in Canada we deployed this with, they actually accelerated the payment of their 3PL movements through the scanning of bill of ladings for cross-border movements. And so what we're doing is we're digitizing some part of the paper element. Now that has relevance for efficiency in network, of course, but at a greater level, it's accountability and transparency across what we're doing. But just an example of how digitization can have operational benefit. But of course, it also forces a greater level of compliance across our network. And if, depending on how the brand uses that, they can use that as a mechanism to pay or not pay as they require based on their SLAs. The next part for us is really the visualization and transfer of data without barriers. So Radaro views itself as a centralized system, a central source of truth. What that means is that we're actually giving that visualization to multiple stakeholders in an organization. Now, when I think about the conversation we're having here with CoRsafe and the relationship that we have, it means we can bring more stakeholders to the level of understanding the importance of supply chain and movement and digitization, right? So we do a lot of that, and we've just invested very heavily into a new tool that's a complete escalations and resolutions platform. So it's like a ticketing system. What it's doing is it's digitally telling us in real time what's going on in the field and bringing that back into our back office so that it can be managed quickly. There's full accountability, and there's a single source of truth platform for what's gone on in a particular workflow. Now, it has different iterations based on the client need, but the reality is that we're bringing third-party stakeholders inside the business to a digital platform to understand the supply chain, right, which we think is absolutely critical. The last bit I'll touch on here is digitization of governance processes, right? So what does this mean? It means building in workflow related to the policies, procedures, and standards that we may set. So how do we actually hold the network to an accountable position? Well, the way we do it in our platform is effectively you cannot progress through your day or through your required role until you've actually completed some of the governance procedures. Now, it may just be acknowledgement of having read the terms and conditions, been in a conditional state to actually execute a particular task. But we're creating a digital stamp of that activity so that it's recordable and evidence-based. And so for future state, and we talk about the best practices that are able to be put in place to eliminate the risks, we're building a workflow around that that's accountable and actually works into the way we execute our day. And we, once again, work with our clients to actively do this. So B2C, from B2C, to B2B. So once again, us being here is a little bit edge case, but it has actually super relevance. And that's really because the COVID impact of visualization, everyone being stuck in their homes, particularly down here in Melbourne, is that there was this increased expectation around how can I see what is happening. And in our view, and the way our business works, is the B2C market went quickly with our technology, and the B2B market early days was you're crazy, mate, bringing that solution to us, right? But what we started to see, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, is an increased appetite for that visualization. Now, it may not be the part we do, or one of the pieces we do, which is this Uber tracking down the road. It may be visualization for a dispatch manager over their fleet, right? Now, telematics have done that for many, many years. We're super aware of that. But what about when you go deeper into the workflow? You go deeper into the individual drops. Well, that's where we bring huge amounts of accountability that, say, telematics doesn't address. The purpose to that is being able to give a dispatch manager that visualization, but also give the warehouse or the shared visibility to what's actually going on with the inventory that's actually consigned and out on the road. So when you start to think about those layers of implementation, in our business, we're now probably around 80% of pipeline for us is actually the service, industrial, and healthcare sector. It's actually away from retail now. So retail is a market that's been very well covered, but it's now more in heavy goods. It's in industrial applications, building materials, construction materials, etc. And for us, while CX is less important in that industry, it's really about what I was talking about before, transparency and accountability, which we're focusing a huge amount on. So then we talk about the stakeholders that matter. So in our world, we're not just about the driver. We're not just about the dispatcher. We're not just about the customer care team. We're about all of them. And we're about the end receivers in the same way. So we talk about stakeholder benefits. And I think testament to this call, Dave, and the discussion around COR, it's everyone's responsibility. There's no wiping your hands of it. There's no devoiding your responsibility of it. And once again, bringing that accountability and visualization to multiple stakeholders is really key for us. So we talk about the real-time transparency of data and reducing things like calls and resolution times, as we just mentioned, but also proactive account management. So for example, our technology is designed to give a territory rep visualization into what an OEM or a manufacturing plant might be doing for distribution within a particular region. It does that so there's interactivity on what's going on between those reps into the actual workflow. We go into the drivers. Now, the drivers are obviously the most critical part to the supply chain. They're the people that do things. Autonomous vehicles, it's good to hear Ray say that I think we're a little way off that practically on road, because it depends what press you read as to where that comes and goes. And, you know, we've been watching things like drones for a while and how they might or might not impact the market. But really, drivers are not going to be replaced anytime soon. And drivers, there's a mix of, I guess, accountability and capability of drivers, and education's really hard, right? So one of the things that we know in our workflow is that you've got to make the digital journey and the accountability journey for drivers really simple. Now, the problem with that is when you've got complicated software, trying to make it simple is actually the art. It's very, very difficult. You want to reduce burden. You want to reduce complexity for a driver. You might have non-English speaking drivers on the road. You might have drivers that don't like using modern technology, smartphones, tablets, whatever it is. So that digitization journey for the driver is absolutely critical. But if you can tie the digitization to their work process, you get far better accountability. We were talking with a client this week that it's actually gamified this onboarding process. So they've used the digitization as an ability to reward and actually recruit drivers into their organization of a certain standard. And they have we built a whole dashboard and stuff for that accountability. But if we're doing that, we've got drivers actually on board and more interested in adhering to the policies, procedures that may be set by the corporate office or the guys in the tower or the people within the shed who don't get in the vehicles. It's important that we kind of get that level of engagement. So what do we do in that context? We talk about daily load processes and accountability, so checklists and procedural kind of information around compliance and the expectations we would have for those particular drivers. We talk about planning routes and how do we give drivers an ability to see their day in advance, understand what their day means, understand when breaks are meant to occur and how we implement breaks into routing, which is what our platform's designed to do. Those breaks are online, offline kind of capabilities. So can a driver can actually go offline and say, look, I'm not working for an hour, I'm taking my actual break. I don't want to be accountable. I don't need to be accountable during that period. How do I go dark? We enable all that through the tech because that's what drivers want, right? So the manager might not want that, but drivers want it. But being able to timestamp and understand those things is absolutely critical. And also preventing the delay of paperwork. So paying your network fast is a great way to incentivize your network to become more accountable, right? So what, once again, data and systemization and technology does is enable speed of this process. So the ability to settle things quickly, have correct execution, correct SLA adherence, and pay against that because we've seen the evidence of it. It's a really critical part, but people that are paid well and paid on time tend to operate and perform better. So a big part for the tech for us. When we talk about operations and dispatch, so the struggle we came across in the operating side of the supply chain was basically wearing multiple hats and having multiple masters. And really our tech is designed around how we can help digitize the dispatcher's day to make their life easier. So how can I spend less time putting out fires, trying to figure out what's gone wrong because things go wrong in supply chain, and having the visualization and data behind what may have happened to resolve it much faster. We spend a lot of time on this particular problem, and also the challenge of how do we re-educate our network? How do we have change in roles and responsibilities and hand over the process or the procedures to the different person coming to fill the seat, which is a huge part of it. Efficiencies in operating is always key. So how do I make someone's day better? How do I make their day more efficient so they can get more done and head home on time rather than continuous overtime or putting out fires on weekends, all that type of stuff. Taking away administrative burden. And what does that mean? I mean, a lot of filing paperwork, heavy kind of manual process can be very burdensome for a lot of people. So digitizing that is key. Compliance reporting. So for us, for example, we have driver COR kind of capability built into Radaro as a module. And what that enables is reporting against how that is actually occurring, but also real-time escalation. So if a driver arrives in the morning and they go through their CRR before actually leaving site or been able to load up site, and they identify that they're not compliant with one of the terms and procedures as written into the process, they can actually be escalated straight to the dispatcher, and the dispatcher can then deal with that driver directly and actually understand if there's a resolution or not to that problem. So once again, this makes things streamlined and accountable, and then there's a digital stamp of exactly what's gone on. So we're trying to take away that burden at every point of our interaction away from the operations team as best we can. Now, once again, people run businesses, not software. Let's be super clear about that. So people must interact with others in order to get things done. The software is really there to create accountability and systemization over that particular process. Coming back to data. So, and I think data is pretty cool because the evolution that we've seen on our side in relation to data and what it means has been rather significant. So in the last 2 years, we've invested very heavily in a relationship with Microsoft. And the data journey is one of what happened or what have we captured or learned from, and then it's into what does that mean, and then what does it mean for the future? It's a real journey, and everyone talks about AI, and I imagine everyone here has had some kind of influence or discussion from an executive panel or corporate or a board about AI and what does it mean for us. And the reality is AI is the ability to interpret a large data set and do something with it. So we use AI in our business now, and we now enable our customers to use AI. The AI, and once again, referring to King Living, for example, and I know Sam's on the call, so hey, Sam, using AI to look at POD images. So we might have thousands of consignments out there that have been delivered. And what do the images actually mean? Putting OCR over that, looking for trends, looking for themes. Are we actually capturing what we're meant to at site when we unload, rather than having to manually go through each individual work order? We're about how can we use that interpretive technology, AI, to bring more enhanced visibility to what we're doing, and then enabling us to make better decisions. So if we see a trend or a theme, how do we then use AI going forward to make that better? So if we notice on a Monday morning, our driver compliance when they arrive at site is poor because of a particular reason, we probably all know what that is, big weekend, we can then use that data and start to design policies and procedures around that. But it's really understanding that data, enabling us to mine the data and then present it back to our clients. And I think software has a big responsibility in this way. Dave, you wanted me up there. Big responsibility.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
Almost done anyway. To bring data back to the supply chain, to say this is what we see, this is how we see it. And I mean, Ray, as you just mentioned, that corporate you spoke to spends a full day of a 3-day board meeting every month going through safety and compliance data. There's a big responsibility to make that process easier, make that process more streamlined, but not lose the accountability that can come from it. And that's all about how we collect, monitor, and interpret the particular data that we generate. So that's me, I think, as a wrap. I really do appreciate Dave being welcomed along, and really, really happy to talk with anyone as well in our business, for any of the people on the call today with the COR team, and have a chat about what we could do or what we could work on and help with. We are a software company that's an Australian-based business and looking to support best practice in markets. So please do feel free to hit me up or hit Dave up, and he can pass my details or Leah's details and our team over to you as well. But looking forward to ongoing sessions, Dave, and future collaboration with CoRsafe. So thanks very much.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. And the reason that slide moved forward is I was unmuting myself, so apologies for that. Because I was going to say something. I have thoughts. I think talking with a number of our clients and our insured carriers, in fact, data is starting to become sort of more overwhelming than it is powerful. And I think it's probably what you guys are doing with your platform and what other platform providers are doing as well in bringing the insights to people that are sitting in this virtual room, that these people are trying to make decisions about safety within their supply chain, or trying to assess whether an incident that's occurred within their chain or an inspection that's occurred within their chain is something that is addressable, requires action, and what level of action is required as well. So, but I think you've got to start with trying to get it onto some sort of platform that brings those data points together to empower that decision making. Otherwise, it ends up becoming a little bit overwhelming. So I think it's a very important point you make, and I guess what we want to see is our customers partnering with their supply chain parties and working together on getting a better outcome. So whether that's hooking into telematics data or it's inspection data at different sites to empower that decision making is something that we're really interested in seeing. It seems to be that consigners and manufacturers within the industry that are starting to go down that path are really starting to get a leg up and have a genuine view of what's happening within their supply chain, as opposed to maybe a controlled or managed view of what's really happening out there.
It's a good point, Dave. I know it's hard to see on this particular slide.
I've just stopped sharing. Of course, I've done that.
We actually released earlier this year a driver scorecard capability that was manipulatable, if that does not make sense at all, but you get my point. You could actually design your own driver scorecard off the back of the data we generate for the purposes of whatever your organisation requires. So whether it's are our customers liking our data, there it is now on the visual, you'll see there's a thing called driver score up in the middle there. That's actually the ability to create scorecarding systems off this data set. And we find clients use that for all different purposes, whether it's to incentivize or penalize, because that's how some will use that information, or just to get snapshots of different operating subsets or divisions as to how things are performing, then it's a really, really valuable tool. But being able to make that editable by each client that we work with to their unique requirements is absolutely critical. So you're absolutely correct. Data and the use of data is only going to grow further and further and further. But the key thing, if I may point it out, is being able to get it in the first place, right? You've got to have some kind of system to get it, and then you can look at it, and then you can interpret it, and then you can do something with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about the lack of
Good.
that was great timing. Brenton, a question for you from the audience. How much have the traditional sort of route optimization, route tracking, driver management capabilities converged in the past couple of years? I think that question is probably scratching at what we were just discussing, the bringing of things together. Are you seeing that being done well?
Am I seeing it being done well? It's complicated, right? Because what you've got is different tools for different purposes trying to come together and be a jack of all. And the difficulty with that is the unique requirements of each of those tools and what they mean. So we have the opinion, and in our business we have a route optimization tool that we built, a proprietary tool. Now there's many tools out there that do route optimization, but our view is the optimization into the execution, then with the CX on the end, is a nice end-to-end capability. The word convergence is interesting. Different industries at different paces on that as well. So, and unfortunately, the complexity of each individual implementation is quite high. So, loading a manufacturing vehicle with, let's say, manufactured windows ex a plant is different to loading a vehicle that's running a parcelized run on the road. So, how do you build routing algorithms to map the different requirements is really, really complicated. So in our world, probably 80% of our clients use our route optimization capability as well as our last mile execution. So that's pretty good uptake, but there are some use cases that we say we can't handle that or we don't do that. And we're quite explicit on it. Now, the Pandora's box, we're always building towards better capability, but we're led by client implementation on that. But unfortunately, some industries, and let me be clear about this one as well, route optimization is great, but there are certainly many applications where the dispatcher knows better than the computer. And we absolutely accommodate that. So our design around that is to build runs and think of them as indicative more so than locked down, but they can be editable and changed by operators before being locked. And I think that's critical. So the problem is where you have system handing from one system to another, you've kind of got to close out systems at certain points in time, and that makes them very difficult to interact in a seamless way. So I think the convergence is going to get better. I think the key bit now is how you can bring third-party data into platforms like ours at scale and with deep complexity. So rather than just a status event, it's out for delivery, it's delivered, which doesn't really give you much insight apart from two action points. It's really about how do you get the multiple steps within that execution into a transactable level that other platforms can interpret it. And that's a real challenge for the industry.
Absolutely. I have a few finishing thoughts and some questions as well. So I'll just flag to everyone we're not far off wrapping up. So if there are any other questions that you may have of either Ray or Brenton, now's the time to send them into the Q&A panel while I share a few final thoughts. I think just observing and listening into the session today, particularly for our consigners in the room, virtual room, but also our carriers and partners, assumption can be or presumption can be your downfall when it comes to getting things right in this regard, whether that's assuming that a partner of yours is all over their own duties, let alone looking after your goods on road or whatever it may be, or assuming that your own duties are covered off in fact, and that everyone's bought into a genuine culture of safety within the business. And I guess as a response or a mitigation to that, there are solutions out there. There is technology out there to bring better visibility to the movement of goods, and particularly the movement of your goods on road. I was only having a conversation yesterday with another provider in the market who was talking about, I guess, that gap between, and it's an obvious one, between how carriers or supply chain parties view themselves and what's really happening out on the road. Sometimes that gap can be wide, sometimes it can be narrow. So what are we doing? How are we challenging ourselves in this evolving environment with what's to come in early 2024 with maybe a re-clarified expectation of duties under the law to make sure we stay ahead of the game? I don't know about you, but if I'm a consigner in the industry, the last thing I want necessarily is to be one of Ray's stories in a PowerPoint at the next CoRsafe webinar. It's 4,500 cases in the courts over a year. I think that was the number you mentioned, Ray, and 22 underway at the moment. And so I think what we want to do is be proactive, stay on top of our duties and obligations, and in fact be great, not just good. I don't know if that resonates with you, Ray.
Does very much so. No one wants to be doing the job after someone's dead. Everyone would like to be involved in interesting, useful problem-solving exercises.
Yep, absolutely. Ray, the final question I had for you, which has been sent through a couple of times, and I'll leave it with you, is that video. That video that we played really early on has resonated with a number of people. Is it publicly available? Is it available to be sent, or is this something that you guys are using specifically for things like this?
I think it's going to be publicly available. From memory, the enforceable undertaking had a couple of deliverables under it, and we don't put the whole package up until all the deliverables are done normally. So just let me, it's meant to be distributed, like there's a AICD component as well for executives to understand their COR obligations. So let me get back to you on that one, Dave.
Awesome, thank you. And we will get an answer to everybody on the call. There's been a number of questions, and I would agree with everyone's conclusions. It was a fantastic video, and certainly gives you pause for reflection given the roles that those two people had as they shared their insights and experiences. Look, I think that's about all for us today. I'd like to pass on again my thanks on behalf of all of our attendees to our guest speakers, Brenton and Ray, for your time and for your insights and your effort, of course. For those who have dialed in, thank you so much for making the time. As I've mentioned, the recording and the presentation will be available. We have a survey that you'll get sent to after the call as well. We'd appreciate your feedback. If there's topics, I've already got a few in mind now just off today that you'd like us to cover off in the future, either at our face-to-face sessions next year or our webinar series, please let us know. We're always happy to get guest speakers in and talk about topical matters that are out there affecting you all. So please give us feedback on that. And if there's anyone that isn't, of course, working with us or working with Radaro, or doesn't have a working relationship with our friends at the Heavy Vehicle Regulator, please reach out. If you'd like to see a little bit more about what we do over here in CoRsafe land, we'd love to work with you and connect for a conversation. So our details will also be circulated with the conclusion of the webinar. So thank you all again for your time. I hope you have a great rest of your Friday, a safe weekend, and probably a Merry Christmas, which feels really scary to be saying. Thank you all for making the time, and a big thanks to Ray's dog, who featured so nicely and beautifully in this webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you all again. Take care.
Thanks, Dave.